Welcome to the Art of Dialogue, Mr. Brown. It's an honor to have you here. Congratulations on reaching your 90th birthday. Um, Very much appreciated that you could be here today. And let's get right to it. Can you share the significant moments in your journey to becoming the first African American mayor of San Francisco? What challenges did you face, and how did you overcome them?
Well, my tenure obviously was for 8 years as mayor. But in order to get to that point, I became a member of the legislature in 1964. Before that, the first time trying, I lost in 1962. I lost by 1,000 votes for a seat in the legislature. It didn't bother me too much because 2 days after I lost, I continued to ring doorbells. And I would say to the people who answered the door all over the district, Fillmore, the Western Addition, uh, part of downtown San Francisco, I thank the person who answered the door for having voted for me, but I'd tell them I lost. Well, now, I didn't know whether they voted for me or not. There's no way, I could in 24 hours or 48 hours from losing tell who did or did not. But I knew people would be too uh, comfortable and too nice to me or anybody else than to say, I didn't vote for you, I don't know who you are, any of those kind of things. But the doorbell ringing after the election was more important as a contribution to my ultimate ascendancy to the mayorship of San Francisco. And I got to tell you that it was a learning experience, a humbling experience to have lost, but a glorious time to have won. 2 years later, lost by 1,000, won by 4,000. And from that moment on, I continued the journey that led me to the speakership of the legislature, a very important position. Some 16 years later, that translated into the third most powerful seat in government in California, if not the first most powerful seat outside of being governor. And all of those steps led me to my ultimate goal, mayorship of San Francisco, some 30 plus years from the first day that I sought public office. And believe me, it was quite a journey.
Do you think that you learned more from your loss than you did from when you won?
No, 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 no. No, I could not have won more from my loss than when I won, simply because when I won the job that I was seeking first time out, I was opposed by the Democratic establishment. They had a guy there already in that job, and I was doing the people's work because the guy had not represented the people well. And I knew that he had not, and so I was well aware of that. But then I learned some things that stood me in good stead going forward. But I didn't learn them from the loss. I learned them from the win.
Many believe you played a pivotal role in launching Kamala Harris's political career. How did your relationship with her influence her rise in politics? And do you think her success would have been possible without your early support?
I can assure you the nature of her talent would have generated somebody that had the skill set that I had to be of assistance to her when she sought the first job of district attorney of San Francisco, and then attorney general of the state of California, and then U.S. senator in California, and then the ultimate job for her before the presidency, hopefully, would be the vice presidency, and that came from Joe Biden. All those things required lots and lots of people. I don't think there are any several persons that could be identified that would be credited with having done or had such a great influence that they would have impacted her career where they could take any credit for it. Yes, she was a person that I gave, I think, her second job to in government. I think the job that I gave her probably was more important than the first job. She was a deputy district attorney in Alameda County, which is how I met her. And the two jobs that she got in association with me came from one administrative person on an issue that affected the lives of people on the unemployment rolls, and people who had been, in one manner or another, not treated fairly and in an equitable fashion. And she learned very well from that, I think, a great amount of knowledge than when she was a deputy district attorney. And then she went on, of course, to envision becoming a candidate for public office by working pursuant to one of my colleagues who worked for me and running a campaign for a person I had appointed to a job in city government. That race they lost. And interestingly enough, it was not only Kamala Harris who was part of that team, but it was current mayor of San Francisco who was part of that team, London Breed. And they were just learning how to really get elected, how to really ring doorbells, how really to do the things that makes you impressive in a contest with someone else for an elected position. However, that appointee of mine lost. And he turns out in this day and age to be now her pastor, her religious leader in San Francisco, Amos Brown, also head of the NAACP. I say all those things because there was a lot of people that played a role, as I said, in her rise to the great level that she is now approaching. And it was because at each one of those steps and stages and interacting, I'm sure she learned more than any one single person could have ever taught her. And she benefited from the exposure and the involvement with all of the people she was involved with. And it led ultimately to her becoming the vice president and now hopefully the president.
So you would basically say that it took a community to raise her to the level of where she is today, along with your help.
Well, it took more than that, actually. It took first Howard University to provide her with the credentials to be an educated person. And you have to be theoretically an educated person to run for public office. And then she became a student at the same law school that I attended. It was called Hastings College of Law at the time, but it's the University of California's first law school, located in San Francisco, right next to the court system in the downtown area of San Francisco and the Civic Center area of San Francisco. And she graduated from that school, lived in Oakland, however, and so she went to work over there. And then we recruited her to come to San Francisco based on the talent that had been recognized by the people who first selected her in Oakland. And so she really graduated all the way to the point at which interaction between all ambitious people, or most ambitious people in the world of politics, can interact. And it was just wonderful to be able to have that kind of talent evidence itself early enough so assisting would reflect that. I got to assume, I didn't know her when she was at Howard University. Uh, I didn't know her when she was at Hastings College of the Law. All those are steps that leads her to where she is today. And that's why I say that there are so many things and so many people that are involved in the political success of almost every politician who runs for office. Most politicians don't want to admit that, but it is clear you cannot rise to the level and the multiple levels that she has managed to achieve without an incredible collection of people who believed in her and trusted her with their vote.
At your 60th birthday party, it was rumored that Clint Eastwood uh, poured champagne or made a mistake and poured champagne on Kamala Harris. What really happened at that event? And what was your impression of Kamala's social standing at that time?
I don't remember, frankly, uh, that event because too many events in my career uh, with any specificity that I could recall uh, what someone did or did not do based upon what some other politician may not have done or may did. I don't recall that at all.
And so, but based on her social standing at that time, as someone who was coming up, rising up, dealing with you, what was her social standing? Was she someone that could stand on her own, could handle, uh, the social settings of the people that she was coming to be around at that particular time?
At the time of her uh, involvement with politics in San Francisco, which is where there was an opportunity for me to get to know her, I must tell you that she was quite uh, impressive uh, in a wonderful way. She really understood uh, what was going on, no matter who was there or what they were doing, or she appeared to be. And she was entertaining in conversations, seemed well informed on everything, and was funny as all hell, had a great sense of humor. And to have that kind of image and that kind of involvement meant you had to be well informed, which obviously means she did more than be a lawyer and a prosecutor, because that's a very limited scope of involvement and exposure to things. But she was able in every way to carry out her employment role, to carry out her appointment role, and while at the same time generate attention for joy and respect. And she got that.
Kamala Harris once referred to her past relationship with you as an albatross around her neck. How did that make you feel? And do you think that she's distanced herself from you for political reasons?
No, she would never distance herself from any of her friends, from any of her associates. However, she does express her opinion about circumstances that might surround her at some point. And believe me, I think that her description of Joe Biden today may be the same kind of a description that she had of me at one time, because I'm certain, since I am a pro at the world of politics, I know when associates and friends of mine, because they're on the wrong side of the issue, they're not well informed, they have their own agenda, and they have an attitude about something that's inconsistent with what I'm trying to market to get vote for, that would be an arbitrage. When she said it, I laughed.
So you laughed when she said that because you knew that it was coming from probably a question that she had taken many times, but then was asked once again, and they were looking for a different answer.
And questions that should not have been uh, put to her. But we politicians don't have an option. We make ourselves available for people to comment, for people to criticize, for people to praise, or people to question. That's who you are if you run for public office. You cannot be about at all times being admired, at all times being supported, because you do have opposition. That's what you have to overcome to win. And believe me, you must never lose that. Because in the world of politics, if you somehow disassociate yourself with all your enemies, in the end, you lose because enemies become friends in a fight with one of their enemies.
Amazing. I never thought of it that way. So politicians, as the saying goes, usually choose strange bedfellows. So one day an enemy might be a friend, and a friend might be an enemy, or the appearance thereof.
That is the only way. If you're going to be a successful politician, you have to put that page in your playbook, and you have to be prepared to go back to it when it's appropriate and when you think you need to go back to it, or even when your friends tell you you need to go back to it. You're not going to win every argument by hoping for conversion. You might hope for conversion, but if you don't get it, you want to win the argument anyway.
You appointed Kamala Harris to influential regulation boards during your time as Speaker. Were those appointments based solely on her qualifications, or was there another level of trust and partnership involved in that decision?
Each time that I have made a decision in my political career of more than 50 years to appoint anybody to any job or position that I have been given the authority to so appoint, I have made the decision based upon whether or not people are truly qualified to do the job. If you're an elected official and you want to be rejected, you start appointing incompetents, because incompetents are going to generate for you a losing report card. You're not going to achieve what you said, why you should be voted for. You're not going to be able to achieve that if you don't fill that responsibility with qualified talent beyond your individual qualified talent. Every appointment I've ever made has met that high standard, as evidenced by who some of those appointees are. For an example, the state of California now has a governor named Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom was never in the world of politics until I appointed him. And the first job that I appointed him to, interestingly enough, was the job of regulation of taxi cabs, of all things, so to speak. Then I put him on the board of supervisors in San Francisco. And then I talked him into running for lieutenant governor of California. And then, of course, I supported him for the governorship, which he won. At each step, I always thought he was the best qualified for each one of the appointments I made for him, and best qualified for the job that he got by virtue of going before the voters. You have to evaluate all those things, because I'm telling you, your career, if you're the appointed authority, is going to be severely damaged because of absence of quality performance, not for anything else, period. So when I appointed Vice President Harris to the two positions that she held in my tenure, in my administration, they were both of the greatest quality, and one of them participated ultimately in the decisions that have been made about universal coverage on the medical side, because one of those physicians evaluated the performance of medical programs and individuals who were running those programs. And that, I suspect, was the one that was most severely impactful for me in my career, and as a person that I was doing whatever I was doing at the time. She did the job. I got elected.
So would you say that she did a stellar job with those two appointments that you appointed her?
She did a fabulous job. Nobody has ever questioned her skills and ability at any position she has been fortunate enough to have, whether it was an appointment by me or whether it was an elected by the people in a campaign for her that many of us supported. At each stage, when she had the job of doing the job, she did it in such a way that she was only viewed on the positive side, and ultimately to the high level of Vice President of the United States. That was an appointment made by Biden, the current president of the United States. And there has been no evidence of anything except quality as a result of that appointment. And that appointment was far more superior and significant than any appointment I made of her. So clearly, I was lucky to have somebody at all stages, and in particular, in her case, become something more than what was expected when that appointment was done. I'm sure that Biden understood what he was doing when he appointed her his running mate for the vice presidency. He said, when he stepped aside and said, "You should run," he said, "I appointed you because I wanted somebody whom I thought could fill my position if need be. And I'm appointing you vice president for that reason." Well, obviously, when you appoint somebody to administrative responsibility for employment relations, which is my first job that I appointed her to, you obviously wouldn't have the skill set expected of a vice president. Or when you appointed someone to the medical operation that led to her doing good work there, you don't think of it as a vice president or anything of that nature, but you do think of it as a person you appointed can do the job that could only bring you pluses.
Some critics argue that Kamala Harris's policies, such as her anti-truancy initiative, disproportionately impacted poor communities of color. Do you believe her career trajectory has been shaped more by her progressive policies or by her willingness to make controversial decisions?
I think Kamala Harris has gotten to where she is today based upon doing the job better than anybody else could do that job. In her capacity as a deputy district attorney or assistant district attorney in San Francisco led to her resigning from that job and taking a second job with Louise Rennie, who was then city attorney, for the express purpose of addressing to the family needs of people with children. What she had learned as a deputy DA in prosecuting people who had been accused or committed crimes led her to believe that there had to be some serious attention given to families, family structures, and how they operate, and who was doing what to whom, and whether or not the parents were really giving the kids the best advice. The business of kids not going to school full time, not being attentive to the attention in school provided from the teachers, would be inconsistent with trying to do what Kamala Harris had in mind. She wanted to eliminate African Americans in particular continuously being prosecuted. And she did that in that program that dealt with the whole business of school attendance, as well as the anti-literacy component she had in all of the things that she was doing. And she ran against the DA whom she resigned from, ultimately, when she got the new job to deal with the family issue, and she won it. And that had to be a competitive operation that led many of her friends, including me, to be helpful in her pursuit thereof. And it was all reflective of her really universal attention to family needs and children.
And do you think that her feeling that way about families, well, particularly African American families, comes from her upbringing and her understanding where she comes from?
I would assume that, as is the case with most African Americans who get elected to any kind of an office, it comes with the wealth of experience that they've had in the system. And the system that we live in the place where we live, and the form of government we're involved in, doesn't operate independently and objectively on every issue. There are people who have to interpret what the rules and regulations are. There are people who interpret what the precedent has been under those rules and regulations. And if you aspire to and get a position that allows you to do something about those things, all of your experiences come to bear on those decisions. And in the various capacities that she has managed to be a part of, it has always been reflective of how she has made decisions, and the operation has been reflective of sensitivity to families.
After Isaac Espinosa's tragic death, Kamala Harris faced backlash for refusing to seek the death penalty for his killer. How do you view her decision, and do you think it helped or hurt her political aspirations at the time?
At that moment, the level of criticism could only mean you have made a decision that is inconsistent with what a majority of the people are looking for. Except there are more people that are against the death penalty than there were for the death penalty. She, I'm sure, did not know that from any survey that she had done, period. I think that was a genuine, soul searching conclusion reached not while she was being elected district attorney, but I think it came from all of her training, her exposure, her family associations, her mom, her father, everything she had been a part of since the first part of her education at in the Berkeley School District. And certainly, as things unfolded for her in her higher education, she had been exposed to more decisions of that nature that you had to make as a student going forward in your expression. She did all of that, period. And one thing as a politician you got to know is that there's some decisions that can be costly to your political ambition. That's when you roll the dice. Kamala was conscious and had been for an extended period of time, I suspect, but just never suspected and never addressed by others in evaluating her. I'm sure that a lot of those people that had voted for her over the other guy were, in some cases, expressing their attitude when they said that they were disappointed, if they said, in her utterance about that particular death. It was a young cop who was killed by some individual who was out committing crimes, and he was trying to stop them from committing crimes. The only thing that wasn't quite timed correctly would have been charge whatever you charge and say in the charge what your views are. She answered a question from somebody in the publication world who probably actually knew what her attitude was about this already. And she would not suspect that some journalist would be trying to harm her politically by asking certain questions. They're really trying to find out where she may or may not stand, because that utterance was shortly after he was killed, not when anybody was arrested or anybody was about to be charged. And so you learn, and I'm sure she learned that whatever her attitudes are about the power and the job she has, there is an appropriate time to talk about it.
So it's basically wrong time and place as far as.
That, and we all have to understand and be clear on that. And I got to tell you, and that sometimes comes with age.
And it comes with being human.
No question,
Yeah.
it comes with being human. But she can deliver and did deliver her message. It didn't harm her one iota, because she got reelected district attorney, and she then got elected statewide against a Republican attorney, district attorney from Los Angeles County, in which that issue was put before the voters. The voters rejected him and supported her. They had more respect for her job doing and her performance on the total operation, rather than the one thing that they may have disagreed with her on, and that might have been the death penalty. Except the world of politics have come to pretty much embrace the idea of abolition of the death penalty.
Kamala Harris is often celebrated for her Back on Track program, which redirected nonviolent drug offenders to education and training rather than jail. How involved were you in shaping her or influencing that policy? And what do you think of its impact?
Well, I think it is the impact has had a tremendous effect on lots of people's lives. She wrote a book where said things of that nature would be reflective of the title of that book. That book was called Smart on Crime, and it demonstrated through the learning process how you, as a person who might be a perpetrator, may be accused and convicted, could very well become something you previously were not if you were given the opportunity to a new form of learning and a new form of living. She afforded thousands of people that opportunity in all of her capacities. So her attitude on crime and how best to handle it has been reflective in everything she's done, all the way up to the job she currently has.
And so that program worked so well that it was even adopted by other larger cities and cities across America. Is that correct?
I suspect that without acknowledging, in many cases, that they were using what she tested, tried, and took the risk of political rejection for, because it has turned out to be far more productive for long-term purposes, the recapturing of people's respect for each other by that role and that path created in her programs.
And so you yourself, as a former mayor, former speaker, you do believe in redemption.
Totally. I practiced law for a long time before being elected to anything. And I was a criminal defense lawyer. I represented people who had committed crimes. I represented people that got convicted. I represented people that clearly had been misguided. Otherwise, they never would have been convicted because they never would have done some of the things that they did do. And I just did not have the benefit of anybody thinking the way Kamala Harris came to think 20 or 30 years after I had left the business of representing people who had committed crimes. Believe me, in the delivery system, many people in the public are hesitant to be supportive and vote for anybody who would be allegedly interpreted by others as soft on crime. Kamala Harris never allowed that concept or that belief to come anywhere near her in the decisions that she made as I observed, period. I don't even remember me thinking that universally there might be a way to change the system. I dealt with my clients who had a problem and that needed to be represented and could afford to pay.
Looking back, how do you assess Kamala Harris's political evolution from a prosecutor in Alameda County to vice president of the United States? Is there anything that you think she should have done differently along the way?
Not at all. I think she has demonstrated, without any previous political experience, how best to address the situation in a way that it could be resolved and subject not to have anybody lose from it. Many of us in the world of politics don't always think that way, but she clearly did, and it clearly worked for her. So when the word redemption is used, I think it is sometimes more applicable appropriately to people who have demonstrated that they are about redemption rather than some of the rest of us who are about redemption, but only if it benefits. I don't think she thought redemption from a benefit standpoint for her. I think she thought about and thinks about redemption for benefit of society, period.
So you think the job that she's done to get where she has gotten has involved a bunch of trials and tribulations that she herself has overcome, as well as help other people overcome?
Well, I don't think it was, I think somewhere she must have had a better handle on redemption as a component because her prosecutory attitude and her prosecutory conduct uh, didn't seem to be influenced heavily by redemption. But once the conviction had been done, then the totality of her advocacy, and in many cases, her conduct, was one of helping you, the defeated person, or the convicted person, remove yourself by the conduct recommended in programs and policies and organizations that would give you the opportunity to become as productive and as responsible as people who have not ever been convicted of anything. And I don't think at any point she thought seriously about the risk for her political ambition, because I don't think she ever made her political ambition a factor for her in whether or not the redemption component of her conduct had to be engaged in.
You mean when she was practicing law, she wasn't thinking about her political ambitions
No,
as she was
not at
sitting
all.
there?
Not at
Yeah,
all.
she was giving out,
She wanted things to be different based on individuals doing them differently. And she did not want people to be permanently assigned to being a criminal, period. She wanted to help you stop being a criminal.
and sometimes it's a blessing in disguise.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't see it at that particular time when the punishment's being handed down. Um, there's speculation that Kamala Harris deliberately distanced herself from your political machine during her first run for San Francisco District Attorney. Was that a calculated move on her part? And
Well,
did it create any kind of tension between you two?
in reality, she did not distance herself because my operation was really the foundation of trying to improve the city, trying to afford opportunities for people of color at every level. And that's not just blacks, but people of color universally. And that reflected itself in the success of the operation politically that I had. And her candidacies in the various categories that she experienced, and the participation of my supporters and the foundation of the folk that I had been involved with for years, reflected itself, frankly, in the kind of good attraction she became for vote-getting purposes, period. And she did not have to distance herself from anything or anybody except the opponent who was running against her, or that she was a candidate against, i.e., in this case, the incumbent DA, for an example. The incumbent DA had not only been a person who was a supporter and a friend, but he had been a person that I helped him get his law license. His mother and father walked precincts for me, etc. But when it was clear after his first term as the district attorney of the city that almost half of the steps he ever took were inconsistent with who my operation embraced. So my operation embraced her candidacy without her, in many cases, having to even ask. And the results were she won. She defeated an incumbent district attorney, just as I had defeated an incumbent mayor. And the interesting thing about those defeats is that those parties never really got together. In the end, when he was defeated, he being the district attorney, by her, he was like the poster child of what ultimately became and called the progressive movement. Yet, she defeated him. I have never lost a race with a constituency any different than the constituency that got her elected.
So, what do you say to people who says that Mr. Willie Brown is a kingmaker? And do you consider Kamala Harris being one of your queens, as you've helped kings, Gavin Newsom and the gentleman that you just spoke of, from that perspective, achieve the goals, the political aspirations that they set out to achieve?
Well, I look to help folk running for public office, not only in San Francisco or in California, but all over the nation, period. I embrace the candidacy. I raise money. I make speeches. I show up at rallies. I show up on Saturday to help ring doorbells. I do calls on the telephone, carrying the message, so to speak. And it's hard to isolate the specifics with reference to what folk are looking for or believed in. You have to have them do that, and you must be just a worker. I was and is still just a worker, so to speak. I had a lot of credit, but I do get some criticism. But none of that bothers me because I made my decision on whom I would support, whom I would work for, what doorbells I would ring, how I would raise money, because I believe that person carried the message of what the system needs, period. And whether they are an admirer of mine, whether they are a friend of mine, if they have the qualifications and the commitment, you will have me as a supporter and a worker.
Given the impact you had on Kamala Harris's early career, do you ever feel underappreciated for your role in shaping one of the most powerful African American women in politics today?
I must tell you that if I ever fall prey to the need for praise, I will have done what my mother would probably get out of her grave in a dress with what she used to do to me when I did something inconsistent with her good judgment. I have never, in the world of politics, been about trying to get praise for me for the achievement someone else has managed to get with my help. I am a great admirer. I appointed more people to significant positions than almost anybody in California who has occupied the role of the appointed authorities, except the governor. In some cases, those people have done just the opposite of what I had wanted them to do. For an example, when Kamala Harris ran for the attorney generalship, one of the persons that I wanted to have support from for Kamala, not for me, but for Kamala, because I thought Kamala represented the best of the movement. I had appointed that person to a very significant position, public defender of San Francisco. For some reason, that woman didn't have the admiration that I thought she had or respect for Kamala Harris. So she supported Kamala Harris's opponent, the guy from LA whom Kamala Harris beat for the attorney generalship. I'll never forget that because there was a bad judgment on my part and a misunderstanding of who that person was. That's one of the few times that I've been profoundly disappointed. I did not need to take any credit initially for appointing her, but I did have to take the blame for with Kamala for her helping my enemies and her enemies. And I have experienced that in other situations involving people holding office. But that's one of the things you have to get accustomed to if you're going to hold public office. I had to get accustomed to tolerating that going forward, even in some cases. So the need and the appetite for personal praising and acknowledgement is inconsistent in what you, as an appointed authority, should suspect.
So you had to hear something from Kamala when the, let me get this straight. You had to hear something from Kamala. You got some feedback from Kamala
Absolutely.
when the lady that you appointed didn't back her when she was running.
No, backed her opponent.
Yeah, she backed her opponent, but you had to hear from Kamala in regards to her
Correct.
backing.
No, your question was, didn't back her. She didn't have to back Kamala.
Right.
But it was unforgivable
that she went with the opponent.
Yeah, that she was against Kamala.
Yes.
Because Kamala represented me. Kamala represented all things we cared about, and everybody I'd ever appointed understood that this was an appointment from a group of people that had produced really quality elected officials, period, including the lady I appointed, we thought.
Guess you live and you learn, huh?
You live and you learn and you get burned. And you can't complain about it. That's the
That's what I find interesting in you, um, the wisdom. They say that when African American, older African Americans die, it's like a library being burned to the ground. As I sit here and I talk to you, I feel that. I just want to let you know that. I just want to let you know the wisdom.
Well, I got to tell you, though, that part of being uh, in the world of politics and moving up, there is a debt you've got to pay as you continuously move up. And you have really got to be about expanding the base. You are not the base. You are a part of the base. And you must continue to try to improve that base with quality and numbers, period. That's the pattern that comes from my mother's oldest son, period. And believe me, I love nothing better than to see something or somebody proceed with the same kind of commitment for sharing their process with others so that the foundation will become one that really replicates itself and produces quality decision making and quality decision makers as things unfold. That's my goal, period.
Mr. Brown, it's widely known that individuals with a felony cannot join the military. How do you reconcile the fact that someone like Donald Trump, who's been convicted of 34 felonies, can still serve as commander in chief, leading soldiers who risk their lives around the world, but are held to a higher standard when it comes to having a criminal record?
He was put in a position by the voters to occupy the position that he held from January of 21 till he was from from not January 21, he was out
Yeah.
January. He limited himself, or we limited himself in January 21. He was put in that position as a result of the campaign that he won that allowed him to get sworn in 2016. At that time, he didn't have any criminal convictions, period. From the pure standpoint of criminal convictions making you not eligible for military service, that's not a good idea. You got to be something more than just a person who's been convicted, period. The integrity of the job that you're sworn to do and what you have to promise to obey and what you have to promise to implement, what should be the measurement. And if there's something you've done in life that may have cost you some aspects of some of your freedoms, there should be an avenue by which you can be reevaluated based on your own application for military service, period. So I'm not one that says that ever, nor do I believe that just a pure conviction could be the basis for your not eligible to serve as a military person. I do think, however, that I would never vote for somebody who's been convicted who had 34 felonies, period. I don't think that there could be a way that I could launder 34 convictions with my standard of who should hold public office. And believe me, it's part of just some small part, but it is a part of why I would never touch Trump for elective office.
So, in that respect, or in that regard, should I say, um, do you think Donald Trump is qualified to be president over the most powerful military in the world?
No, no, not at all.
Beings that the soldiers who fight cannot join, or the individuals can't join, but yet he can have 34 felonies.
Well, I was um, a great opponent in my capacity as an elected official to Donald Trump's ascendancy to the presidency in 2016. I thought it was just not consistent with anything to do. And he wasn't convicted at that time. If he had been convicted, I'm almost certain that he would not have been elected, period. And I think that's still the issue today. I think anybody that gets so uh, convicted, but no, if it was been 15 years ago when he had gotten convicted, and his conviction had to do with, uh, you know, some form of fraud on the money side, etc. Maybe in the 15 years since his conviction, he would be eligible for consideration, and he should be given the opportunity to prove that he is capable of discharging and had, over those 15 years, discharged the kind of standards that Kamala Harris had on the natural. And so he wouldn't be eligible unless he had demonstrated those standards. But then all of the other things that are negatives on the Trump side would require equal attention. And I would only guess that he could not meet the standards of anybody seeking public office at the presidential level where he was in command of anything having to do with the military.
Mr. Brown, Kamala Harris's past relationships, including with yourself and Montel Williams, have been the subject of public discussion. Now that she's married to a Caucasian man, do you think her marriage plays a role in how white voters perceive her? Does it make her appear safer, more relatable, especially in the context of her potential to become president?
No, I don't think so. I think that whomever she chooses to be her husband, whomever she chooses to date, whomever she chooses to have public friendships with, are all factors that people take into consideration at any level of an office you may seek, but certainly at the presidential level. And it's part of the judgment that you should be demonstrating and have demonstrated over the years of your being, period. And I think Kamala Harris does that as well as I've ever seen anybody else do it. And I, for one, do not believe should be burdened with assumptions being made by any of us with reference to her friendships, her acquaintanceships, uh, without some connection between her doing her duty as a deputy district attorney, her doing her duty as a senator, or who doing her duty as a president or a vice president for that matter, unless there's something about those relationships that in the minds of an individual would be inconsistent with her being able to do the job. No applicabilities to associations.
To the people, and this has been a wide running uh, conversation, you've had a personal relationship with Kamala Harris as well as a professional relationship. For the people who say that Kamala Harris is not black, what do you say to that?
I would say that I'm smiling, frankly, in answer to the question. Because Kamala Harris is as much of a black woman as I have ever been associated with, or in any fashion. As a matter of fact, I've often wondered, how can I get her not to say some of the things she would say, and not to take some position that I thought was not good, but I did not ever view her as being other than black. Never. in life. And I still don't view her as being other than black. And by the way, I don't think she views herself as being other than black. I think her commitment to her mother was Indian, East Indian. I think her commitment to her father, who's a Jamaican, I think in each of those cases, people have forgotten that those are people with the same African heritage. That everybody, her color, my color, and their color, actually has. At one time, white folks used to say in this country, if you had 1 cent of black blood in you, you were black. When we were enforcing Jim Crow, that is exactly how they put it. And suddenly, because her father is Jamaican and her mother is East Indian, somehow that makes her less than black. It doesn't. By their standards, that ought to be a certification of her blackness, so to speak. But it serves their purpose, period. And that is not, in my opinion, erasable. And I think the fact that she married a person of Jewish faith doesn't make her a Jew. There's a whole lot of other things that makes the combination thereof. And I just wished in this political world we could get off of having to justify our ethnicity and our culture beyond our qualifications.
Do you think it's more because she's running as president that this scrutiny has become so polarizing? The question of her being black, African American, do you think that's
I
the
think
reason?
that all started when Barack Obama became a candidate for national office. I think Barack Obama, when he ran for the U.S. Senate, was concerned that the people in Illinois, the white people, may be against him because he was black. He never thought himself of being anything else, ethnicity speaking. Uh, at one point, somebody raised the question about his ethnicity when they said that his mother was white. And somebody quickly responded by calling attention to the fact that his father was an African, pure African, and in the color of skin, not as black as Willie Brown, or not as black, as Mike Garrett, the famous running back for the SC Trojans, or not as black as Nat King Cole, uh, when chances are, uh, etc., or blind Stevie Wonder. No, they didn't equate any of negatives to that. But when Barack Obama was running, they said he was black until he started running against Trump. And suddenly they didn't say he wasn't black. What he said was he wasn't born in this country. And he went about trying to find a way to prove that he wasn't born in this country. There's so much trivia, so much nonsense associated with ethnicity and with culture associations, etc., that have nothing to do with your qualifications.
You just gave me a question because the immigration debate is something that's been strong. Uh, they've criticized Kamala Harris, saying that, it's the worst border ever. And to deal with it from a homeland standpoint, the fact that Donald Trump has been married to nothing but immigrant women and would then go and say as many things as he said in relation to Barack Obama not being from here, questioning Kamala Harris's uh, being black. Don't you think that's a bit hypocritical?
In the world of Donald Trump, allegations of the nature that addresses the alleged issues of his opponent from an ethnicity standpoint are always subject to his trying to figure out how to make that a problem for his electability if that individual is his opponent. But that's Donald Trump. I don't think there should ever be any assumption made about Donald Trump inconsistent with zero mutual respect for anything or anybody, including many of his own supporters, many of his own appointees, many of his own associates in any significant capacity. He is just totally and completely irresponsible, ill-advised, and hopefully would, in some manner or another, demonstrate that sufficiently so he would never be in a position to have any policy made, implemented based on his attitude.
Mr. Brown, in 2019, Trump told NBC's Chuck Todd that he ended the family separation policy at the border, leaving out that it was his own administration that had implemented it as a standard practice. How do you view this kind of lie by omission in politics? And do you think it's an effective way for leaders like Trump to reshape narratives in their favor?
I think Trump never, ever really thinks about anything except something that can generate an immediate response from the voters without any accuracy of what he's doing, without any clear, exhaustive thought process, without any exposure to any of his associates to see whether or not any of this makes any sense. Donald Trump is without any commitment to quality thinking. And that is demonstrated by most of his utterances and simultaneously about his conduct. He does not have the ability to recall what he said a half an hour ago before he said it versus when he said it versus whether or not there's any truth to it, whether or not there's any reality associated with it, whether or not it serves any universal purpose, whether or not it serves any nature of goodwill. He is a true person who is committed to simply generating positive reactions from people for him without reference to even the person that he is trying to convince or for anybody else. He's the highest level of irresponsible utterances in public life that I've ever heard from anybody. He misrepresents and lies consistently. Doesn't even consider them lies. Doesn't even consider that misrepresentation. He's just amazing. I don't know any other politician who's been able to be competitive and get away with that conduct, period.
Mr. Brown, despite verifiable evidence that he lost in 2020, Trump continues to claim he won, leading to widespread belief of this false narrative among millions of Americans. How dangerous do you think this kind of deception to democracy is? And how do you believe the current state of politics should deal with such lies?
For openness, I think Trump's lying has cost a multiplicity of lives in America already. I think his constant utterances to his followers through the social media process and through the rally process, where he lambasts the nation in the process of conducting democratic elections that are not servicing his purpose in any fashion. He is really dangerous. And he's gotten so bold as to be able to say that he only loses elections that are crooked. He does not believe, he says, that there would be an occasion when his candidacy would be rejected, period, no matter who was running on the other side. That's really warped. And that's really dangerous, frankly, for the system, because it means that there's no such thing as quality democratic elections without responding to his personal need to have him be the person so elected. And that's scary, because he adds to that, he intends to reward anybody who is part of what he considers to be the people who voted for him and anybody who voted for the other side. He apparently thinks should be prosecuted if identified. He, in the January 6, 2021 demonstrations at the Capitol, they turned into executions for 4 or 5 police officers and serious injuries for multi other persons. And the only injured parties were the people that he claims were his supporters. And he claims they were patriots. And that all these other people who were harmed in any fashion, including the sworn police officers, the Capitol Police Corps, were criminal enemies and they deserved whatever they got. That attitude being on display for any person seeking public office in this democracy could lead only to the revolution that he hopes would install him as the new king, period.
Throughout his presidency, Trump repeatedly promised major plans like his health care reform that were always coming in 2 weeks, but never materialized. Do you think this kind of hucksterism, constantly selling promises without delivering, has a lasting impact on public trust in political leaders? How do you think it compares to more traditional political strategies?
The whole business of making promises you don't intend to keep is a sin of the worst order, because it means you lied to try to be persuasive in your pursuit of the transfer of power to you if you don't already have power, or for maintenance of power to you if you already have power. It is just amazing, frankly, how many of us in this democracy that don't see that as being a permanent disability for any person with that attitude to ever be allowed successfully to become in charge of anything, because it's inconsistent with the founding fathers. It's inconsistent with the Constitution. It can only lead to something worse than anything we've experienced, including slavery.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kamala Harris once mentioned that she washed collard greens in the bathtub while preparing for a large Christmas party. Some critics have argued that this story panders to cultural stereotypes aimed at African American voters. Have you ever tasted Kamala Harris's collard greens?
No.
And what do you think about this story that she told in regards to her preparing collard greens in the bathtub? And do you think that panders to African American voters?
I think that collard greens are one of the choices of vegetables that I've eaten all of my life, from the time that I was ever invited to the kitchen table. One of the vegetables was collard greens. And collard greens were grown in the backyard, the garden, as people call it. But for me, it was part of our growing, just like we raised our chickens, we raised our hogs for our meat. All those things are part of the heritage from food standpoint of people of color. So reference to collard greens is clearly an indication of your food of choice based on your ethnicity in many cases. On the other hand, when you think about the Japanese food, sushi, you know that you're dealing with the issue of the kind of food that's associated with being a Japanese. You know, frankly, that in the world of those who said they're Italian, and so suddenly when they start eating in a great amount of food that's associated, noodles and things of that nature,
Pasta.
then you suddenly discover, wait a minute, the Chinese didn't call it pasta. They called it something else. And it was the same kind of food, but it was called, so the food labels have generally always come from some people who eat that kind of food on a preferential basis and have for a long time. When you say Irish potatoes, people now know we're talking about the potatoes that the Irish grew as part of substantive food on their tables with regularity. So yes, greens, collard greens, relates to Black people, period. And you're not trying to do anything other than let folk know you know how to cook food that's traditionally provided for Black people.
Thank you. I remember my grandmother actually washing the collard greens in the kitchen sink.
You got to wash it. You got to get whatever dirt was on them because you grew them usually, or you knew somebody that grew them. Seldom could you ever find those in the grocery store unless they know that Black people shop there, because you don't really, it's amazing how the food identifies, in many cases, part of your ethnic heritage. But on many occasions, somebody is trying to make it appear as if there's something negative about eating collard greens. Well, I disagree with them.
I do too. In 1994, there were claims that you bypassed other Democrats to appoint Kamala Harris to the California Medical Assistance Commission, a position with the annual salary of over $70,000, allegedly due to your personal relationship with her. How do you respond to these criticisms, and do you believe personal relationships should ever play a role in political appointments?
I think knowledge of individuals play the role in whom you select if you have the appointing power, because you've got to make sure that there is quality being exercised by you when you make the appointments, and then quality being exercised by the appointee when they perform their duties. You do your own search, and under no circumstances should you disqualify somebody because you know them, because you love them, because they are a part of your team, because they have earned participation in your operating your elected position, because you want the best quality. And if you ignore the best quality to try to comply with something that makes no sense at all, in making someone a disabled individual for appointments, it's just not right. You're not going to get there. I recall in my early years when somebody said to John F. Kennedy, the President of these United States, you appointed your brother Attorney General. The pay of the Attorney General was whatever it was at that time. The duties was what that time. He responded by saying, yes, I did. And I did that because my mother was not a lawyer. In other words, I would have appointed my mother, but she wasn't a lawyer. So I appointed the best next thing that I know about was my brother. There is no justification for the disqualification of individuals who may be related to or connected with you in any fashion. Only thing that should make them not available to serve, if all the other qualifications are there, clearly it should be they only selected for that reason. You have no way of ever knowing whether that was the only reason if they have all the other qualifications.
And that's the reason for the question. Would you say that based on Kamala Harris's, after being under your tenure, would you say based on her progress and what she's become, that you did make the right choice when you made those choices?
I am so pleased that I actually can talk about the people that I have appointed and where they are in the delivery system. And I do that every day of my life. When called upon to say, how did you get where you are? I refer to the people who helped me get there, and in particular, the ones who accepted appointments from me to keep me there and to keep my programs being as productive as they have been for humankind.
Mr. Brown, you've previously stated that Kamala Harris is the most qualified person to be president. Could you elaborate on why you hold this view and what specific qualities or achievements make her stand out as a top candidate for president of the United States?
When we vote for a person to be president, we should be about uh, trying to determine whether or not the individuals have credentials. And the credentials start with, are they well educated? Yes, she is. No question about that. Number two, in their employment process, have they had significant positions that reflect addressing the issues that affects the lives of people? Yes, she has all those qualifications. Has there been the level of honesty and adherence to the highest ethical standards? Yes, it's clear that all of those things are reflective of her process. Does she have a good work ethic? In other words, Does she actually read the documents? Does she attend the discussions? Does she participate and exchange views with equals, people who are perceived as equals? Yes, she does all of that. So there is no question in anybody's mind, except Donald Trump's, of her qualifications. They are there in the most direct fashion. And then she has additional advantages. In various positions that make up where she lands in the presidency, she's done many of those things successfully and with great respect and great appreciation, period. So a combination of all those things makes her far more qualified than many people who've already held the presidency, period, and who, in many cases, seek the presidency, period. I cannot imagine anybody raising a question about her presidential qualifications. They're on display through all of the last 12, 15 years of her office holding. You don't make the U.S. Senate without those kind of credentials. You don't make the job of highest prosecutor in your state without all those qualifications. And you certainly don't get there if there's any tarnish anywhere about your integrity. She matches all of those qualifications and with great pluses, period. And so therefore, in the world of decision making on qualifications, she has an A plus average. If the number of how you get an A is a 4, she's way beyond that 4, period. And I'm just pleased that we have that opportunity for a woman and a woman of color. Those two things are really important to me.
Is it true that you once helped Kamala Harris secure a $5,000 donation from Donald Trump? In your opinion, what's the biggest difference between Donald Trump then and now? And was he a Democrat or Republican when he made that donation?
I believe that he was a Republican when he made that donation. In reality, however, I think he had just become a Republican. I think all the time that I ever really knew him would be over the years he was a Democrat, period. I also think he was not as ill prepared as he is today when he made that donation. I don't think there was any inquiry made on that donation other than who asked him to donate it. And he was an acquaintance of mine. He attended birthday parties of people like Steve Wynn, of people in multiple categories on the friendship side. And in the world of politics, you ask your friends to donate to people you are supporting. And they usually will respond because they ask you to donate to people they are supporting. And that's the nature of the donations to political campaigns in most cases, and certainly in all the cases. I had the responsibility to generate support for 80 assembly districts in the state of California on behalf of candidacies that hopefully would allow me to keep my job as the Speaker of the House. And Donald Trump was just in the category of the collecting of donations over the years. When I left that and became the mayor, that process continued. That donation was solicited when I was mayor.
And so, did Donald Trump know that you were soliciting that donation on behalf of Kamala Harris?
Oh, yeah, because it made out to Kamala Harris's campaign.
Mm.
It wasn't any, they don't donate money to you as a solicitor uh, because you can't, in many cases, you can't give hidden contributions. We don't allow that anywhere anymore in law. We've changed that completely. We say you get donation, you name who that person is that donated them, you give the address of that person, so that if there is a examination of your contribution report, it contains the information that can take the person who's looking to whomever you got it from and whomever you. And so that contribution didn't come to me. That contribution solicited by me, but that contribution, along with many other contributions, went to Kamala Harris in the same year that many other contributions from that same source went to many other politicians.
So we can
But
honor.
nobody ever looks at all of those. They only look at the selected ones that they're looking to criticize you for.
Absolutely. So we can say now that on side of all of the rhetoric that's going on, that Donald Trump actually supports Kamala Harris for being the president of the United States, even though he's saying otherwise.
He certainly was a contributor to a career that clearly had no cap on how high it might go, period. Because if you were pursuing the Attorney General or you're pursuing a U.S. Senate seat, in either one of those categories, you are potential a candidate for something even greater.
Mr. Brown, Kamala Harris has faced significant scrutiny for her past relationship with you, despite her accomplishments as an attorney and a public official. In contrast, Melania Trump, who has posed for nude photos for British GQ before dating and marrying Donald Trump, hasn't faced the same level of public criticism. Do you think Kamala Harris's personal life has been scrutinized more harshly than Melania Trump's? And what does this say about the public perception about women in politics?
Well, first and foremost, the issue of questioning people's relationships with other people are legitimate, but those are relationships with other people. And if in any of that represents a threat to functioning effectively in the office for which you're seeking, that's a legitimate evaluation that needs to be made by the voting public, period. There'd be no question about that. But it is beyond the process of comparison between a wife of one person and the husband of another person, and neither one of those people are candidates. They do not deserve to be compared as people are doing with Mrs. Trump and with Vice President Harris. You can't make any comparison. Mrs. Trump is an immigrant who came here. She cannot become president. You have to be born here to be president. Vice President Harris was born here. Vice President Harris is an American citizen, and Vice President Harris is eligible to run. All the things that go with that candidacy can be examined. There is absolutely no reason to have those same standards applicable to Mrs. Trump. She's not running for president, period. So to bring her into the dialogue, you better have some reason other than the fact that she's just prospectively the first lady. No, that's not right.
Absolutely. So you think the comparison, or when they were running the side-by-side comparison of Melania Trump versus Michelle Obama, that would be more fair as a
No,
compare?
I don't think Michelle Obama and those two, that the other lady, uh, it would be so unfair to the other lady just on a quick look. She's not from here. And in view of the fact that she's not from here, a stand-up examination of the two for comparison purposes, Michelle Obama would be so far superior, period. But then Michelle Obama was not anything but the first lady, period. And if you want to raise questions about the qualification of the first ladies, that's a fair comparison. Performance of fair ladies, of first ladies, that's a comparison you can make. People criticized heavily Mrs. Reagan because they said she had too much authority, too much influence for President Reagan. But it got to the point where it was as basic, so to speak, on the negative side, as people have on occasions tried to attribute prospectively to Kamala Harris's best man, a first man, I don't know what you call.
First man.
Yeah, first man.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that handles itself. Whereas the business of pure comparison of Mrs. Obama to Melania Harris, Mrs. Trump, is you know, I'm telling you, it's not fair to the first lady in that situation, because clearly Mrs. Obama, a Harvard graduate, big time law firm operative, hired Barack Obama as an employee of hers when he came out of law school after his wonderful performance as the editor of the Law School Journal. There's just so much, so numbers are so different, quality is so different based on performance in our measurement system. I just don't think that that's a fair way to measure who's the best.
I think coming from you, I think that was very profound. And I think a lot of people are going to understand that, because the general public doesn't really get that. You know, when you want to criticize somebody for being qualified versus somebody who's not even in the conversation of qualification, it's so unfair, just like you said. Thank you for that. Mr. Brown, Donald Trump has claimed that he knows you well and has shared a story about a near-death experience involving a helicopter that required an emergency landing, implying you were aboard with him. Were you ever on a helicopter with Donald Trump? And what are your thoughts on this story? Do you recall anything like this happening?
No, I do not ever recall anything like that happen, that could have happened, because I was never in life on an aircraft of any kind with Donald Trump, whether it was a normal airplane, whether it was a rocket to the moon, whether it was a airplane that does anything in the air, or any kind of an airplane of any sort, and in particular a helicopter. No, I was never, ever, in any fashion, in a flying instrument with Donald Trump. But let's go backwards. Your question also says he knows you, you know him well. No, I don't. I do not know Donald Trump well enough to have a participation with him on an airplane. On an occasion when Donald Trump wanted to know in detail something about an issue in Los Angeles, I was serving then as Speaker. And I was speaking at Harvard, and he wanted to do it over lunch, which I many times grant to people whom I have previously met. And I previously met Donald Trump through my connection with my friends in Vegas. Uh, as I said earlier, like Steve Wynn and others, and I certainly would have lunch with him before I go back to California. It turns out that I am in Boston, and he is in D.C. He's in New York, so I'm going to go to New York before I catch the plane back at 5:30. He says I can get you here and get you to the same flight schedule in New York, and I can have the conversation with you. Uh, and I did that. I met him, but he was never on any airplane with me, period. He was never in the air with me that I was conscious of, period. And it did not happen as he has so related it. And I think that's now been acknowledged by him, because there must have been an occasion in Los Angeles, California, when he did have a black politician talk to him and ride with him to look at the turf of whatever they were discussing for a possible Trump Tower. That person was named Nate Holden, a former state senator, who's 6 feet 4 or 5 inches tall. I'm 5'8", so he could not have made the mistake of a physical view of us so that he'd get us mixed up by name. I think, as usual, though, Donald Trump's uh, capacity on the thought process and the brain whirl causes him not to pay attention to details between a 5'8" and a 6'4". Most of us would instantly know that that's not a good thing, accuracy-wise. Mm-hmm. Even if we wanted to lie, you probably should have thought of a story that would be more attuned to who I am and what I'm about. And it would have been even better for him if he had said, I had lunch with him at the Oak Room in the Plaza Hotel in New York in the early 90s to discuss an issue in Los Angeles that he could not help me with. That would be accurate.
That would be accurate. So do you think he might have said that sometimes knowing the truth of the matter, but then using it because he knows of your relationship with Kamala Harris?
I think he made the story up because of my relationship with Kamala Harris. I don't think he had any interest in telling anything other than something that would cause him to allegedly be able to generate some negative toward Kamala Harris based upon our previous associations, which means he thinks I am a liability for her. And he's trying to convey that he knows enough about me and her to have me have told him things about her that made no sense.
And that's simply not true, correct?
No, totally not true. Are you kidding me? And he has stopped repeating it.
As a matter of fact, you threatened a lawsuit, correct?
He threatened a lawsuit against the New York Times, and I threatened a lawsuit against him because I have a great respect for the journalistic world. And if he sued the New York Times, I was going to sue him and agree to testify for the New York Times as I'm talking to you about the absence of veracity to anything he said related to me and Harris.
Thank you for clearing that up. Appreciate it. What was your immediate reaction when you first heard about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump? And how did this event impact your perspective on the political climate as it is today?
I really was of the opinion that somebody was thinking they were hoping to defeat Donald Trump. And when in reality, my interpretation once it became clear that he had been just barely harmed, that it would benefit him. And it clearly would have benefited him, except for the move by Biden to step aside and give the world an opportunity, and particularly the voters in America, to see a woman of color well qualified to be the president. And overnight, whatever benefit my interpretation of that shot may have been was totally misplaced. Clearly, the injury to Trump was of no substance when people got the opportunity to improve upon who the president should be.
Do you think that's a sad state of affairs?
I think it's a tragedy, frankly, that it would take something like that to have people stop to evaluate who they are, because clearly, for their vote purposes, it is clear that the reference to the attempted assassination has not proven to be at all relevant to the vote process in this election cycle, period. It has not generated any hostility to the victim. It has not generated any benefit to the victim, no hostility to the participant on the other side of the candidacy, and no benefit to the other side of the candidacy. It has triggered an alarming amount of inspection of the security surrounding elected officials, period. And it did demonstrate that assassination attempt, how really lightweight, so to speak, that our security system for personal help and protection is to the highest level of people, because it is clear that based on the facts as I have read them that have been come from the various reports, it's clear indication that this was not an attempted disruption for political purposes. This was genuinely somebody who really just doesn't like Donald Trump.
Right. So the insinuation that it was planned, staged, from your perspective and what you read and understood, is simply not true.
No, not true at all. Not true at all. That was a person as warped as you can possibly get. And believe me, and in many cases, as amateurish on that warp as you could possibly get. And it's just fortunate for all of us he did not succeed.
Mr. Brown, in a 1995 special report with Diane Sawyer, you were portrayed as a rogue politician known for your flamboyant style, flashy clothes, fancy parties, and associated with fine women. With Kamala Harris's featured in the footage, in one clip, a reporter asked her, "Are you his daughter?" Given that this footage is now resurfacing just hours before Kamala Harris's first debate against Donald Trump, what are your thoughts on how this portrayal may impact the public's perception of both you and Kamala Harris today? And do you believe this has any relevance in the current political climate?
I don't think that it will prove to be a disability, as one would try to make it for use on Donald Trump's behalf. After all, Donald Trump has been convicted of the 34 counts of things that he was doing on the money side, but even more dramatically, he has been accused and in civil proceedings held accountable for trying to hide his relationship in which he paid for, period. And so it would have to be somebody trying to erode the clear quality reputation that Kamala Harris has and trying to make it as negative as the interpretation of Donald Trump. Therefore, I do not believe that such a comparison by anybody would have any effect on this decision on Kamala Harris's qualifications.
Thank you. I also want to say that just as an observation, I was sitting and looking at a picture of you and Kamala back in '94. You guys made a great couple. She was very beautiful then. She's very beautiful now. Um, do you still love her?
Very much so.
Mr. Brown, what specific strategies do you believe Kamala Harris needs to employ to secure a win in the upcoming debate against Donald Trump?
I think Kamala Harris's team started a month ago or more when she was tapped by Joe Biden, the president, to become his candidate in the absence of his leaving the fray. I think that everything that they have done to expose her to the public has given her the opportunity to solicit the vote of the public, and she has succeeded. The nature of her candidacy to the people who vote for the Democrat, she has justified that vote by the nature of her public presentations. And in reality, she has clearly presented a contrast of who should be the president in this two-person candidacy so dramatic that even classy Republicans like the Vice President Cheney's daughter has decided to publicly support the Democratic nominee. Cheney has decided to support the Democratic nominee. John McCain's son has announced he's a Republican for the Democratic nominee. I just got to admire the team that obviously has had those commitments before, but they've been carefully to lay them out when it best serves the purpose of saying to the world who she really is. And they've done it in a fashion so that it clearly didn't come from a political think tank. It came from them personally and her personal acquaintanceship with them. And that is the key to her election, to the extent that in America, 85 million or more people are able to have a personal conclusion about Kamala Harris will ensure that she is going to be elected.
And speaking about Kamala Harris being a woman, an African American woman running for president, do you think that her win would signify a win, for all women of America, white, black, Asian, Latino, and so forth? Do you think her win as a woman, not just an African American woman, would be a win for all women?
I do believe that if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016 race, when she lost, it was too bad, because we really need to show that women can present themselves sufficiently to run the nation, just as men have presented themselves all these years, more than 200 years of running this nation. And they have not always done a sterling job. Kamala Harris's candidacy is now presenting the opportunity for women to again be able to demonstrate through her how talented and equal to, if not greater than, males they can be in running this nation. She wins. All women run. All women can run for every job there is. Women have in some cases proven that they can do it for the state. Hasn't happened in our state yet, California, but many other states it has happened in. Currently, New York has a female governor. A number of other states with female. Michigan is a female governor. There are other states with female governors, and that's a great thing. But that's still not the nation capital yet. Kamala Harris will do the nation's capital. Our capital has already been, at one time, operated for 8 years by a black man, Barack Obama. Not a woman yet, and certainly this is opportunity for not only a woman, but for a second black, and in this case, a black woman. It's really quite inspirational for every woman, no matter what age.
Recently, Vladimir Putin from the Kremlin has said that he supports Kamala Harris's candidacy to be the next president of the United States. Do you think that's propaganda? Do you think it's sincere? What is your take on that?
Well, if he had said, I want her to replace me in my country, I'm going to look for me a Kamala Harris. And I'm willing to do what Biden did. I'm willing to quit to let my version of Kamala Harris become. I would think he was sincerely trying to help women. But I know he's trying to help Biden. Not Biden. He's trying to help Trump. He would like to have Biden's view not ever surface, period, in his country by virtue of conduct from him. So he is extremely committed to defeating Kamala Harris, not to helping Kamala Harris, no matter what he says. Just as he was highly critical of Biden, he was very helpful, apparently, based on electronic communications, to helping his friend Donald Trump. You got to know that there's no way there's anything that has occurred since that last effort that helped defeat Hillary. That suddenly is, I think he said, you want me to be for? We have a concept in the world of politics. We say we can be either for you or against you, whichever will help. And I'm sure that's what he told Trump. I could be for or against you, whichever will help. And I'm sure Trump said, the people in my country have a problem with you, as evidenced by the comments they make. Why don't you evidence that you got a problem with me as well? Why don't you say that you much prefer Kamala Harris? And why don't you do it for these reasons? So we may hear more from Putin. All clearly, in my opinion, for helping Trump and hurting Harris, and therefore hurting our nation.
In San Francisco, recent police statistics have shown the rise in burglaries and the surge in car thefts. Additionally, the number of tents occupied by the homeless after the COVID situation. What are your thoughts? And if you could inform the mayor, who's the mayor now, um, about what he should do, what would your advice be?
First and foremost, the current mayor of San Francisco is someone who started in politics with me. Just as Newsom started in politics with me, the female mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, started in politics in my office in 1995 when I was running for my first term. And therefore, I'm trying my best to make sure she wins. I've also, for the several years that she has already been mayor, I've done everything I can to make her successful at the job. The whole business of the pandemic altered the situations in this country, all over the country, and in particular in the cities like San Francisco and New York and Chicago and other places. And then suddenly, when the U.S. government changed its view about how to address the issue and began to pull back the resources made available, by then, the location of where you, a homeless person, could go, you had been pushed out because close contact was deemed the method by which people contracted COVID. And it was just for everywhere, period. Every convention that normally would be in San Francisco was no longer. Every theater, movie house was no longer. They were still here, but not operational. It was just a disastrous attempt to resurrect and reconstruct what your city was like, because remote work became the order of the day, respected by allegedly everybody. All the things that went into the pandemic answer was contra to operating cities. And then when the government pulled their, U.S. government, pulled their assistant polls, it was a great challenge. But that challenge would have to be met by small business people who formerly had coffee shops and things of that nature in places where there were no workers. People had left the employment world. It was a great challenge. So London Breed, the mayor of the city, faced those challenges, and it took her a while because during the time of the pandemic, the increase in people who wanted to take advantage of the absence of other people in locations, and in particular cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, etc., they did so. And the horror that has been experienced from that by many of us, including the mayor of San Francisco, has been such that it is just now kind of right in itself. But it still hasn't generated tourism. What this city relies upon. It has not generated conventions, which this city relies upon, because the hotel accommodations are down to under 50%, and therefore the employees working in hotels are no longer as plentiful as they were to do that work because they're not needed. There's just so many things that are beyond the control. And it is tough duty for this mayor or any other mayor to address the issue. I am doing my best for another one of my prize appointments to be helpful, and I will continue to do it that way. And in the process, it appears as if the crime rate is going down, i.e., particularly the burglaries and the auto break-ins and things of that nature. It appears also that the tenant attack occupancy on city streets in San Francisco, as in New York, has altered itself dramatically. There are clearly not as many tents as there were. And with a reduction in the number of crimes, robberies in stores, and things of that nature, there's been a change in all that. What would I do? I would continue to do what London Breed is doing, except I would accelerate it. And that's what she's attempting to do with measures on the ballot to get authorization from the public to spend more money on the remedial programs.
Not only that, with help from Kamala Harris, as she becomes president of the United States, she could possibly shift some of that, the federal attention towards San Francisco and other inner cities that may need that assistance.
I'm sure that Kamala Harris's candidacy will be of great benefit and would be the instruments that every mayor, including any person running for mayor, either in San Francisco or other places, even if they run against an incumbent, are going to be relying upon the federal government to be a deliberative, delivering partner, period. And the relationships between a mayor and the president is one of the great, great values that any city could benefit from. But San Francisco in particular will benefit. Because in an earlier question you gave me, I mentioned to you that my appointment of Newsom to governorship, I said at the time that another person I appointed was running for re-election, that the two newcomers assisting him, even though he lost, was the mayor of San Francisco, not the mayor at that time, but an employee of mine, and Kamala Harris, not an employee, but a friend. And the two of them was helping to run that campaign. It's when they first learned how to do campaigning, they lost, but that friendship would pay off handsomely for San Francisco. Kamala gets reelected.
Mr. Brown, what do you want your legacy to be when it's all said and done? And if you could say something to Kamala Harris right now, could you please say it?
What does my legacy mean to the world? Probably not much. What it means to me is everything, because my legacy really, what my great pride is, the people that get elected because of what I've done and because of how I helped and because of how I gave them the opportunity and I took the heat. That's the people, and those are the people that I want to be really proud of. I was extremely proud of Dianne Feinstein, for an example. I was the only person that supported her in 1969, when people really didn't support women. And I helped her get the job, number 2 job, of running San Francisco in 1969. That's how far back it goes. Every mayor since that time, I have been of some assistance, including the mayor that was assassinated, that got Dianne Feinstein the job from her capacity for the job that I helped her get when Moscone was assassinated and she became the mayor of the city. I have been of assistance to Jerry Brown, who's done 16 years as governor of the state of California. when no other elected official supported his candidacy in his first run for governor, job that his father had. I did my efforts to help him get there. So I'm really proud of all this collection of people that I had something to do with, getting elected and holding elected office. And I hope it'll be instructional enough so that there will be multiple people who will benefit running for public office with the support of folk Willie Brown helped get public office to begin with. That's really what I want my legacy to produce, because the good thing that comes from holding public office will go on in forever, in perpetuity.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
And then what would I say to Kamala Harris? Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Just win, baby, win.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the Art of Dialogue, Mr. Willie Brown. I appreciate you. That's all I can say. I appreciate you. And
Thank
more,
you.
And more importantly, though, I think when you just said what you just said, I think that your hand extends far beyond what you could ever imagine. Because when you come to San Francisco, even when you probably were serving, as mayor and a speaker, you helped cultivate this city in Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, and all of the people that you just mentioned. I guess that's why they give you the nickname the Kingmaker. And you don't really. I don't think you take too kind to that, but you are. You're a major league chess player. You play chess. Do you play chess for real? Do you play chess?
Kidding me? Are you kidding me?
See?
My mother. I played more chess in law school than I read.
Wow. That was another thing. I didn't know you were a lawyer. I think that's one of the things that goes overlooked.
Yeah, well, it may go overlooked, but I'm telling you, you got a lot of people who still use my law office.
Oh, wow.
For their survival.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Like I say, I appreciate you.
All right.
Thank you for the time. Thank you for the time.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed.
I must tell you that, I got to ask full time, will you be agreed to an interview? And I have virtually turned everybody down because I know they want to talk about Kamala Harris.
Right.
That's why they were talking to me.
Right.
Because all the things I did, people have forgotten. I didn't start being interviewed because of Kamala Harris.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I did 60 Minutes on the Sunday production was 1984.
Wow.
When I did the Democratic National Convention here with Dianne Feinstein.
Right.
Then in 88, I was the chair of the Revan's candidacy.
Right.
When we had the bailout in Atlanta, Georgia, at that national convention.
Mm-hmm.
And then I am probably the only person who had 2 stints on 60 Minutes. 84 and 86,
wow.
96.
Right.
They came back to see me in 96 to talk about what I had told them could be achievable in California. And it was. And they wanted to go over that again.
Right.
So, it's fabulous now that I can walk down the streets of San Francisco, including the people living in shelter. And they, hey, Mayor Brown, what are you doing out here?
Right.
So I absolutely love the city that much.
Yeah. And you're respected. And
I love what I did.
Yeah, and you're respected from that, like you said, from the people, from shelters to the elite. I think that says something about who you are and what your contribution has been and how people view you. It's a difference.
And I want you to know that there's not a day when I don't get at least 3 or 4 questions, all in fun. How'd you get here? By helicopter?
You serious? That's the running joke, right?
Yeah.
That's the
Oh
running joke.
yeah.
I could imagine.
Everybody is still
I could
doing it.
imagine that. I could imagine that. I mean,
And
yeah.
yesterday, when I was in Los Angeles,
Mhm.
I did a funeral,
Oh, you did? Okay.
1,000-person funeral
Wow.
yesterday in LA for a buddy of mine
Okay.
who served in the legislature with me.
Okay.
And when I ran for speaker, he was vote number 4
Wow.
for a speakership that needed 41 votes.
Wow.
He was number 4.
Wow.
I walked with him when he and Caesar was trying to get a farm labor bill. And we walked from down in Bakersfield to the Capitol.
Cesar Chavez.
Yeah, Caesar Chavez. And you were good at it. You know. But I helped bury him yesterday.
Wow. Sorry to hear that.
And we had 30 folk present for that. And they were all people, because we are a real tight clan,
Absolutely.
so to speak.
Right.
And it was good to see them all, what have you. But you know who Maxine Waters is.
Yeah, absolutely.
She was there yesterday.
Oh, she was?
Oh, she came out of Washington to come to the funeral for her.
Absolutely.
And then when my mother died,
Wow.
half of the Republican caucus flew from California to help me bury my mother.
Is
that
the camera
was
still
in-
running? Yeah. We still running? I got one more question.
All
This
right.
this comes from, I'm going to tell you where it comes from, then I'm going to ask the question. This comes from Carl Snowden. I don't know if you know Carl Snowden. He's from Maryland. Civil rights activist.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
you.
and and he told me, because I talked to him on the phone, I told him I was going to interview you, and I said, you got a question for Willie Brown? He's like, so he asked me, to ask this question. Looking at the Black Caucus in Congress in California, we have some of should I say, the most African Americans serving in Congress that has ever served. I would say the Senate also, if you include those, as well as California. Where do you see America and the government in 10 years?
I don't see the opportunity being ignored for the growth in elective office among Black people, especially Black women. Kamala wins. Would not surprise me if there were not 4 or 5 more Black U.S. senators in the next two, at least in the next cycle, and maybe the next 2 cycles. So that's 4 years. I think there would be another 4 or 5, maybe a half a dozen Black people holding Senate seats, including, I must tell you, women handsomely. I think there may even be an expansion of Black governors in this cycle. Kamala wins. I know there'll be a ton of new Black city mayors. Kamala wins. That's all part of the enormous benefit of elective office that Black people are going to experience, but in particular, women are going to experience. Period.
Thank you. Appreciate it.